Dean Andrew Abela is going to share with us the reason that I was attracted to come to Catholic University. Their mission here is to train virtuous business leaders. In multiple ways, we've been touching on that topic. And Dean Abela has thought a lot about it, put it to practice in business, and is teaching the next generation of business students how to do that. So, Dean Abela, we're looking forward to learning the Busch School of Business secret. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome again. I was told to do a commercial break before I begin. There's a table with a bunch of books up there. I wanted to, we have put out several copies of a book that a colleague of mine and I put together called A Catechism for Business. This is a Catholic take on business, Catholic Church teaching about business. If you're interested, please help yourselves to take a copy. I had the privilege of presenting a copy of this to Pope Francis a few years ago, which was very exciting. And you talk about selling ice to Eskimos. Try giving a catechism to the Pope, you know. But another book I want to highlight, which unfortunately I don't have free copies of, but I think you can buy them, is called Business Secrets of Trappist Monks. It's written by August Turak, who's sitting right here. It's one of the finest books I've ever read about spirituality and business. And it's published by the Columbia Business School, so this is a heavy-hitting publisher. And August also has the distinction of introducing Brian and myself. So he's the real reason you're all here, ultimately. So I wanted to plug his book for him. So yesterday evening, as Imam Abdullah Salki gave his prayer, I was moved to share something with you today. I mentioned before that I was baptized and raised Catholic. What I didn't mention is that I'm originally from the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. It's a little island. Our native tongue is Maltese, which is a Semitic dialect, the dialect of Arabic. And so listening to him pray in Arabic just took me back home. But I also wanted to share with you, I think you'll find this interesting. I went to church for many years, so a Catholic church, a Christian church, praying to Allah, because that's our word in Maltese for God. So in case you didn't know, there's a community in this world that is Christian that prays to Allah. So I thought you would appreciate that. So what I've been asked to talk about today is this question of virtuous business, and I think it fits in the question of what does it take to fully bring your faith to work? Just a quick question. I'm seeing some people come in. Have all the other groups come back? I just want to make... Okay, good, okay, I just want to make sure I'm not jumping the gun here. Good. So what does it look like to fully bring your faith to work? Because we know that that's not a given, right? We know people of faith, religious people, who don't seem to bring their faith to work, who seem to feel like they have to check their faith at the door, sometimes because they're afraid of offending, or afraid of being stigmatized. Other times, I know some people where it seems like their faith makes absolutely no difference to their work. And that can be an issue, right? There's a quote I have here from the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church, who expressed a concern, I'll read it, about those who, quote, think that religion consists in acts of worship alone and in the discharge of certain moral obligations, and who imagine they can plunge themselves into earthly affairs in such a way as to imply that these are altogether divorced from the religious life. This split between the faith which many profess and their daily lives deserves to be counted among the more serious errors of our age. Right? When we don't, or we're unable to live our faith out in the working world is an issue. One of our colleagues here at Catholic University, Dr. Brandon Vaidyanathan, he's chair of our sociology department, and he wanted to study this phenomenon and particularly see how it was playing out in global capitalism, particularly in the global south. So he did two in-depth studies, one in Dubai, which is where he's from originally, and one in Bangalore, among IT managers, 200 in-depth interviews in total. And he was interviewing middle managers in IT who were professedly people of faith, serious people of faith who are very active in their faith lives. So not just occasional participants kind of thing. In interviewing them, this came out when they talked about their faith, and they would say things like, my self-worth comes from God alone, that I feel I have to forgive those, even those who've done great wrong to me. So kind of strong religious sentiments. But then the very same people, when he talked to them about their life at work, said things like, I'm just in it for the cash. I don't care anything about loyalty to the company. They would say things like, you may not agree with what they ask you to do, but you just need to do it to get the promotion. Or they would say, I cannot trust these people. Everyone is out to just get ahead. It's the stark kind of difference between who they were as a religious person and who they were at work. It seems incongruous. To me, it seems so to him. I'm not going to mention which religion they belong to so as not to offend anyone. Okay, they're Catholic. But I do think it's a widespread problem. I don't think it's just a Catholic thing, this sort of division of faith and work. It seems that there would be many reasons why people would do this. One of which, I think, is this implicit assumption that being effective at work and being religious are at best irrelevant to each other and at worst incompatible. That some religions talk about, loving the poor and giving away and so on. And well, how could that be compatible with business? So I need to sort of separate my life. St. Thomas Aquinas has a quote where he says that trade has a certain element of baseness associated with it. So when you read stuff like that, you think, oh, I guess there must be something not religious about business. So the challenge is how to bring those two worlds completely and fully together. To live a unified life, an integrated life, right? A life of integrity. And there's something that we find very, very useful in teaching this to our students here at the Busch School, and it's the concept of virtue, the idea of virtue. So what is a virtue? A virtue is simply a good habit, right? And the opposite of virtue is a vice, which is a bad habit. So it'd be things like, lying, cheating, stealing, gossiping. These are bad habits or vices. Being kind, being trustworthy, these are good habits or virtues. The virtues or good habits are ones that fit with our human nature, right? That make us and those around us happy. When you live a virtuous life, you tend to be a happier person. People around you tend to be happier. It makes sense, right? If you're in the habit of being good to others, then you'll have lots of friends and you'll tend to be successful, so why not be happy? Whereas the vices do the opposite. So what is the connection with religion, and virtue? The connection is the idea that God made us a certain way, right? We made us to be good. We are flawed, but we are good. We're made to be good. And actually more specifically in Judaism, in Christianity, I believe in Sufi Islam, the notion that we're made actually in the image of God, right? And that being made in a certain way by God, designed in a certain way, means that there are certain behaviors that work for us as human beings, right? And virtue are those behaviors that work for us. And that when we act the way we were designed to act, everything comes out better, right? People are happier, people are good to each other, and communities flourish. The fact that our religions teach us not to lie or cheat or steal or kill is not just because it's bad for others when we lie to them or steal from them or kill them, right? But it's also, in a certain sense, bad for us, right? When I lie to somebody, in some ways I do more damage to myself than to the person I lied to. Because the person I lied to gets some typically temporary disadvantage from that lie, right? Or similar, if I stole from somebody, they get a disadvantage of losing what they stole. But what happens to me is I've made my character to be more like a liar or a thief, right? And that's ultimately much more harmful to myself than to another, right? So the point of acting virtuously, not just because it's good for others, but because it's good for ourselves as well. The really great thing about virtues is that they are habits. In other words, they can be cultivated and practiced, that anybody can grow in virtue by practicing. And this is very contrary to the secular notion of business ethics or of ethics in general, where there's a sense that if it's not hard, then it's not really ethical. You know, they're just like somehow to be a fully ethical person, you must be suffering and struggling. That if there's no struggle, then how ethical could that be? You know, virtue is the opposite. The more you practice a virtue, the easier it gets. If you think about it, it's obvious. Right? The more you tell the truth, the easier you get at telling the truth, and the more uncomfortable you get if you feel like you're inclined to tell a lie. And so, the more you do good, the easier it becomes to do good. And you can see why this is good for business, right? The more virtuous people you have in the business, the better, the stronger the business is going to be. There are 4 what are called the cardinal virtues, which are sort of central virtues, and then all the other virtues tend to cluster around them. I want to go through those. And then what I'd like to do is, if I have enough time, is just sort of open up to your comments and thoughts. Does this concept fit with my religion? Could this concept work in my company? Just to kind of get a sort of a practical take on this. So the first is called prudence, and it's the habit of making wise decisions. Right? So it's considering all the options, carefully weighing the principles, weighing the evidence, and making thoughtful decisions. So one who habitually does that becomes a prudent person. Justice is the habit of being fair to others, right? Giving to each other to his or her due, figuring out what each person deserves in a particular situation, in particular circumstances, and making sure they get them. So think about considering whether somebody ought to be promoted, for example. Somebody who is a just person is in the habit of considering all these things and making a fair decision. Fortitude, or courage, is the third cardinal virtue, and this is the habit of doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Right? So it's not a question of feeling. None of these are, in fact, a question of feeling. They're a question of more of practice. So you could be terrified and still be a very courageous person if you still do the right thing in a particular situation. And again, the more you do the right thing, even when you're afraid, the more courageous you become and the easier it becomes. And the fourth one is temperance, or the habit of resisting temptation, the temptation to do something wrong, resisting what's bad for you or what's bad for others. So not eating to excess, not lashing out to others when you're angry, you know, that sort of thing. So the proposal we have is that living the virtues is a way for religious people, and really anybody, right, to live out their faith at work, because it gives us a structure and a practice for living as people of faith in a work environment. So anyway, that's the sort of the essence of it, and it's the essence of what we teach here at the Busch School. I'd just love to get now your reaction. This is a golden opportunity for us to get kind of your take from your different perspectives.
I'll take the microphones.
Thank you very much. And then somebody give me a time signal when I'm out of time. So any reactions, thoughts? Yes?
How do we write that?
That is such a great question. So first point, the folks, I'll read the question. The question is, saying that faith helps us to be more virtuous, does that imply that people who have no faith can't be virtuous? First point to make to that question always is, it was the pagans that invented virtue. So people without faith who invented virtue. So manifestly, it cannot be the case that if you don't have faith, you can't be virtuous. And so there are many people who have no faith who would aspire to these virtues. The Stoics, for example, from ancient Greece, and there are modern Stoics as well. People, they're very concerned about virtue. We, as people of faith, I think, believe we get extra help. Right? Somebody talked about grace before, and I think you can say that without offending. So everybody's free to find their own path of virtue, right? But I think we can all agree that being vicious is not a good thing. So people of faith and people who are not of faith can agree on that, right? So here's something that we can all do together. It's an extra bonus, I think, as a person of faith. I mentioned this last night at dinner, you know, that it's really hard to do good year in, year out without God's help. I think that. It's been my experience, and I was an atheist for a while, so I know it from experience, you know. Maybe I was just a really bad atheist. But so anyway, does that answer your question? That was a great question. Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. I'm on a personal mission to redefine leadership in corporate America based on these principles.
Super.
So my question to you comes from a very personal space of the incongruence between justice and prudence, for example. Sometimes when there's competing priorities that come up with bottom line, in that there's personal incentives to maybe not be just to get the promotion, or not be prudent because there's personal gain to be achieved. And so when you work in kind of economic models that are based on capitalism, will often come with the survival of the fittest. The virtues, the question is, how do you reconcile and still make sure that people can operate from a place which I think is human nature natural, against the competing force that is survival of the fittest and greater individual good?
Wow, these are really great questions. So the question was, how do you manage the apparent tension, right, between living virtuously and apparently survival of the fittest,
and
right?
What gets promoted, actually elevated in corporate America so often.
Right, so sometimes that survival of the fittest notion gets promoted in a company. I have seen, and over the years, there have been a number of studies over the decades, and they don't always call it virtuous behavior, but sometimes they call it altruism, you know. But in general, what the studies find is that over the medium and long term, what we would call good behavior tends to be more prosperous behavior. So companies that foster collaborative behavior among their employees tend to do better on a sustained basis. In the short term, it's always possible to maximize gains by cutting corners, right? We know that from every aspect of life, particularly in business. And some companies, unfortunately, cultivate a culture that encourages that sort of shortcuts. And it's not, we're not talking necessarily about illegal behavior, just very kind of selfish type of behaviors. But those companies don't tend to prosper over the longer term. And so a company that's looking for long-term sustained growth would do well to support virtue. I want to make just a little side point to the first question. I think one of the benefits of being a person of faith is you have additional resources to resist those temptations to cut corners along the way. You know, if you believe that God's watching at all times, even if compliance isn't, you know, you have added incentive. You know, the virtue of prudence in particular, I think, is a really powerful one, and it's a word. These words are so old that they've kind of gotten misused, and to be prudent almost has this kind of negative connotation, almost as bad as the temperance. You know, the virtue of temperance nowadays we think of it just in terms of prohibition, somebody who doesn't drink. You know, but these are much richer words, and particularly prudence. The habit of making wise decisions. So the wisdom of a decision will take into account the financial implications. Absolutely, right? We're running companies. If we don't make money, we're no longer a company. You know, I explain to our students, you know, without profit, you're just another not-for-profit, and someone else has to make money to fund you, right? So the beauty of a business is it's done well is an organization that serves society and sustains itself rather than being dependent on somebody else, right? So prudence takes all of that very seriously. You know, you calculate net present values, and you look at all the legal implications, but you also look at the full human implications as well. And you know that if you violate the human implications, that doesn't go unpunished over the long term, that people will lose motivation, you lose retention, all the things that we've kind of been talking about today. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great, very good. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about the difference between virtuous behavior as a means to an end and virtuous behavior as an end in itself? And the sustainability of virtuous behavior, if in fact it's merely a means to an end. I'm going to be virtuous because your studies show me it's good for the bottom line. I'm going to be virtuous because my faith says it's the right thing to do. And can you sustain it without that?
Very good. Being virtuous as a means to an end versus virtuous as an end in itself. There's again, great question. Both are good, and I'll explain why. There's an element with virtue of fake it till you make it. That if you're not courageous, you know, and you're terrified of everything, you just try. You know, you just try. And let's say you're trying because the research says if you do, you'll feel better. You know, so you try. Eventually, you keep trying it hard enough, you eventually become courageous. So you get there. And then what you discover along the way, to your second point, is, and this is why I think virtue theory is, as you say, it just so aligns with who we are as human beings, and why it trumps by far any other theory of ethics. So I mentioned last night I did a PhD in business ethics, so I studied all the theories ad nauseum. No theory other than virtue ethics can give you a solid reason why should I be ethical. They'll tell you how to be ethical, but there is no answer as to why. They'll say things like, well, you might get caught. Okay, well, or maybe not. Are you a gambling kind of person, you know? Well, people won't like you if you don't find out. Well, I don't care about people. You know, you have these responses, there's comebacks to every reason that people would give for every other ethical theory as to why be ethical. But virtue basically says, if you live this way, you will be happier, right? You will be a happy, fulfilled person if you live according to virtue, because that's the way you're made. It's like having a healthy diet. You feel better because that's the way you were made, you know? And I've never heard come back say, well, I don't care about being happy. Then you're crazy, you know? Because everybody wants to be happy. So you might start out doing it as a means to an end, but along the way, I think you discover that this is what a happy life is made of, you know? So it's you wouldn't continue, I think, to do it just as a means, because you'll realize that it is not only an end in itself, but in a certain sense, the end of human life. Does that help? There was a question of, okay, yep.
One question and then I have a question.
Sure. Sorry, I skipped over you before. You had your hand up before, yeah.
Mine is short. So as a resource for the topic that was brought up in terms of survival of the fittest, there's a book called Givers and Takers. And it explains how those who are givers tend to be more successful in business, even as an individual person, a society or business. Pardon? Give and take? Okay, there.
Give and take. Super.
Yeah, correct. And basically, it creates trust and culture, and then that's why the whole institution arises and does better.
Thank you. Quick comment, and then Brian's question. It works everywhere, right? That God made us this way, that everything works better when people are good to each other, right? Absolutely everything works better, short term, long term. The only problem is when people don't want to do that, right? Or don't have the strength to do it or choose not to do it. So virtue is all about getting in the habit of being good to each other. And the more you get in the habit, the easier it becomes. Yes, sir.
So I think I can speak for everyone here that we're so appreciative that you've opened up the business school for this conference. And my question is, I mean, we want to, as timekeeper, I have to move to the next speaker. Can we come back next year and you can tell us more?
Remember, he said when he came to meet me, how quick it took me to make a decision. So my answer is yes. You are most welcome. Please come back.
It is. Couldn't we have taken much more? I mean, just that's the tip. I mean, we should all take a course from Dean Abela, and so thank you so much. Our next keynote speaker, and someone that I've gotten to know through Texas Instruments. This thing sort of is contagious between companies. In May, Texas Instruments partnered with the foundation to hold an event similar to this, but a bit different. It was mostly just one or two panels and some discussion. American Airlines was there. That's how I got to know them. Of course, Kent Johnson was the rabble-rouser behind it all. And he invited Sue Warnke from Salesforce to come. And you're going to introduce your other Salesforce colleagues, I hope, as you speak. And what an amazing story. Personal story she has, and also what's the company's done. So, Sue, I'm just going to turn it over to you and tell us the Salesforce Faithforce story.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Wow. Well, thank you very much. I ask a question. How many of you have been in a meeting where it's an alignment meeting, you're trying to get to an end, and it's a lot of people and it's a lot of work, and you're getting close, and it feels kind of like a ball is finally rolling down a hill. It feels good. But then something happens, and somebody says something that kind of changes everything. You been in that situation? So I work at Salesforce, the #1 CRM in the world, one of the fastest growing enterprise businesses. We help customers with all of their management. We build apps. And I work in the technology organization. And I was in this meeting a few months ago, and it was one of those, and we worked for hours trying to get alignment on this new infrastructure strategy. We were about 15 minutes from the end, and there were about 40 people on the call all over the world, crouched in conference rooms on their laptops. And somebody in Seattle says, "Can I say something?" And we're like, "No." He keeps talking, and he says, "I want to throw something out there. I think we've buried the lead." And any journalism people out there? This man happened to be a journalist in his former life. And that's kind of a serious thing. When you have buried the lead in a story, it means you've missed the boat. It means you're telling the wrong story. And it means you have to start over, right? And, silence befell this meeting. And nobody said anything for a moment. And this person is a friend of mine. His name's Byron. And he said his heart was racing. And he thought he had committed career suicide. And the first person spoke up and said, "What are you talking about?" And the next person said, "Let's get back to business." And the third person, who happened to be the leader of the meeting and a very top leader, said, "Tell me more." And he started to make his case, which had taken him the whole meeting to formulate. And one by one, I mentioned this, it felt like this ball rolling down a hill. One by one, people started to see the truth of what this person was saying, that we had missed the lead and we needed to start over. And one by one, they kind of came behind him. And in the course of 10 minutes, pivoted this ball. And it would have to start over, it would have to go back uphill, but together, we could push the ball. And, there's a quote, Patton was mentioned earlier. My favorite quote from Patton says, "Courage is fear. Hanging on one more minute." That's what this guy up in Bellevue had done. He had taken a courageous step. He didn't want to, but something told him to take that step. And I believe each and every one of you here today is one of those courageous people who, when momentum was pushing down a hill, you were the lone voice at some point saying, "I think there's another story here. I think there's more to this." And some of you have been pushing that ball for 25 years. Some of you are just starting. I'm just starting, right? But there's momentum. And what happens when people get behind you is you get closer to the top. And I believe that we are today standing in the center of a tipping point. In the faith diversity movement. I think this room is the center of a tipping point. And what happens when you crest a tipping point? What does that ball do? It rolls. It rolls without you even pushing it. It has momentum. You have created a virtuous cycle that lives on its own. And we're at that stage because of brave voices like all of you. So I'm going to talk today about my story, the Faithforce story, and hopefully some tips that may apply to you. My story is that it's pretty ridiculous, actually, that I'm standing up here at a faith conference for anybody who knows my story, because I was a very proud agnostic my entire life. I grew up in a very strict religious city, and my family was not religious, and so I was an outsider. And I began to really hate religion. And I spent my entire life, not just agnostic, but anti-religious. I'll give you a snapshot. When I was getting my master's and starting my PhD program, I taught literature. And I would tell my students, I'm still bubbly, I was bubbly then, and I would say with open arms, you can write about anything that you want, except religion. I virtually forbade it, okay? That was most of my life. And then life happens, and about 3 years ago, I experienced something really radical in my life. And you can read about that. I talk about it all the time. I have a blog called leanership.org. Lean, not lead. But I converted to Christianity. And I was baptized in Easter 2017, so just 3 years ago. And I showed up to work the next day. The most transformative event of my life had just happened. And I ran into a colleague, and she said, "What did you do over the weekend?" And I had an identity crisis in that moment. I hadn't come out of hiding yet. What do? Do I stand up for this new Jesus that I said that I believed in? And I took a deep breath, and I said, "Nothing much." And it was devastating, that moment. I had failed in this new identity. And my desire was to hold away and say, I obviously don't belong here. I don't see anybody like me. This is not a place for me. But instead, I started to ask questions. And I started to ask people, what do you think? Do you think I go bear my cross? I don't know. And they said, "I think so." And the more people I talked to, I found out that people of all faiths and atheists felt that they had to hide or wondered if they had to hide. They weren't sure. And then I encountered these incredible trailblazers named Michael Roberts, who happens to be here. He was in Australia at the time. Farah Siddiqui was in Chicago. And I found that they had already started this process to start an ERG at Salesforce, a faith ERG. And I was annoying enough, right, that they eventually let me glom on and help launch this group. So, it was 2 years ago. I've only been around for 2 years. And the first launch we had was in San Francisco, which is where I am. So imagine San Francisco, which is pretty well recognized as one of the least religious cities in the world. And I'm in the lobby of Salesforce handing out flyers for this thing called Faithforce. And I got a lot of weird looks, I'll tell you. But we launched and we had a panel with atheists and Buddhists and every religion, and people shared simply what their faith meant to them, how they celebrate the holidays. About 60 people showed up. And then we had other events all around the world. And, it was pretty fast, the attraction to this thing. And, our leaders, and we've got other leaders here in the room, we've got Matt Deep, we've got people from here from Reston, and we are so honored that we get to this. We get to watch this happen. Really, it didn't take a whole lot of effort on our part. And one by one, people came to us. We started with 3 groups, and then 5 cities, 10 cities. We are now 17 cities all around the globe. It's the fastest growing ERG in company history. It's the one that executives talk about more than any other. Mark Benioff, our CEO, wrote a book this past year called The Trailblazer. And in it, he devotes a chapter to equality and diversity. And he names one group to exemplify that. You probably guess what that was. That was Faithforce. So they're telling our story. Why? Because they see what it looks like. And this is what it looks like. It looks like incredible celebration events. We had our first ever Muslim celebration for Eid, and hundreds came out. And that happened all over the world, and people, Muslim employees were in tears because they felt seen for the first time. And we had Easter, we had all these events, so celebration was a big pillar. Also philanthropy is a huge uniter, as all of you have attested to. We have, just in the past year, given 6,000 hours to over 90 faith-based nonprofits. These are just Faithforce members have given 6,000 hours in the past year to volunteering at faith-based organizations. We do a huge World Refugee Day event with UNICEF and World Vision and on. It's just beautiful. We do education events. We partner with our LGBT group. We partner with our veterans group, ability group, and we put on education events. We help events teams make huge events like Dreamforce, the biggest technology conference in the world, are now faith-friendly. We have prayer and meditation spaces. We have halal and kosher foods. People come and they pray. Customers pray. Customers who build trust with us, who pray with us, who hear our story, and decide to invest more. Of course, it helps innovation because we are servicing hundreds of faith-based organizations that are providing disaster recovery, who are coordinating 3.4 million volunteers, who are ending sex trafficking. They're using our app to do that. That makes us improve our product. We have new use cases. So this is beautiful, and people are seeing it and flocking to it. But then something happened. October 27th, 2018. What was that? Anybody know? Pittsburgh. It was the Tree of Life shooting. So we hadn't planned for that. That wasn't in the playbook. Happened on a Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, and I didn't hear about it. I went to bed and I woke up Sunday morning and I turned on the news and I saw this horrible thing, and I thought, because now I had befriended so many Jewish employees and I felt for them, and I felt what this must feel like for them. And I got an email from one who said simply, Sue, we have to do something. And I was like, true, what can we do? We're Faithforce now. We're sort of responsible for this community. I emailed Michael and Farah, and we said, let's do a vigil. And we pitched it to our Chief Equality Officer, Tony Profit, that day on a Saturday, and he answered us, and he said, absolutely. And we didn't know what we were doing, but I posted that night at about 10 p.m. on Chatter, our social network, and so we're having this event, we stand in solidarity, feel free to share your words of support, here's some links. And I went to bed. And the next morning, there were 1,000 comments, views, and likes, and shares. This touched people, and it opened up a door, it released them to love each other in a way we've never seen in this forum before. And it was a beautiful event. We had a rabbi come, we lit candles for the victims. He told us about mourning rituals in the Jewish faith. And it was about 10 minutes before the end of the session, and a woman raised her hand in the back, my co-organizer, and she said, there's a call on the line from Pittsburgh, and I think you should take it. He's an employee. And he said, and we opened up the line, and he said, my name is Ari. He said, my cousin was one of the victims. He said, my other cousin, his sister, survived by hiding in the boiler room. He said, thank you for giving my family a voice. This is transformative, what's happening. It's not just not divisive when implemented properly. It's not just good for business, which it is, but this is good for humanity. This is not only not divisive, but it is an antidote to divisiveness. And people are seeing that, and we are part of that. And there's a big responsibility that comes with that, because standing at this precipice in the center of a tipping point means that we are holding that ball together. And we need to go out into the world and continue this message and talk to your HR and your diversity leaders. And it's okay, by the way, if you're early on this ramp. If you look up and it looks daunting, that's okay. That's where you are. And all that's needed of you is a baby step. You don't have to be the one pushing it over. The reason Salesforce has crested the tipping point is not because of our greatness, right? It's because of many people who paved the way. And it just happened to be that right time and place, right? But if you're at the beginning, then you really are that brave soul that has raised their hand and said, I'm going to hang on for one more minute. I'm going to be courageous and just take that baby step. I'll share just a few of the quick implementation tips that helped us and may or may not apply in your world. And then we'll end. But for us, the biggest thing is that we are outward focused. Yes, Christians, we have Bible studies and prayer rooms, and the Muslims meet together for prayer, and the Jewish employees. That's like 5% of what this is about for us. This is about giving. This is about lifting others. Every single event we put on is co-organized. Easter is organized by the Muslims, and then the Jewish employees, and the Hindus, and the atheists. And Eid everything is co-organized. There's no silos at all. Another thing is that we very actively include our atheist sisters and brothers. Having been an agnostic, I empathize greatly that they are misunderstood and often judged. They feel just as much pain as we do, and it will behoove all of us to include them and learn from them. We have an atheist event going on in like 3 days called Stories from an Atheist. Another thing is we're very clear on what we're not. And we say that every single time we talk about Faithforce. We say we are not proselytizing. This is about changing your views. We're not political. It's not a platform for us. And we're not homogenizing. This is not squishy pool of spirituality. Everybody thinks basically the same. It's not that at all. This is honoring the distinctions of everybody's faith. Another thing is that we are compassionate for HR. Sometimes we put up an us versus them dichotomy, and we think that they're stopping us. Any HR or diversity inclusion leaders in the audience, we love you. You are not the enemy, and we need to sit with our leaders and understand them, because it is not easy, the decisions that they have to make and the momentum that they are pushing against. So just empathize with them. So just as a final reminder, think of that quote from General Patton: courage is fear. Hanging on one more minute. And I'll end with a quote from our beloved Faithforce Global President, Farah Siddiqui. She posted this on Twitter a few weeks ago, and I loved it so much, it's become my favorite tweet ever. And she said, faith inclusion equals inclusion. Human resources and diversity and inclusion leaders need to say, faith diversity, I see you. I see you, and I hear you, and I welcome you, and I make space for you, because there's space for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, next, wait, no, thank you.
Okay.
Next year, I'm going to bring Kleenexes. So we have just a small gift for you, and I'll just say what it is. It's a compass, and for your desk, and just keep that true north. I mean, such an inspiration. Thank you. Just to shift gears a little bit, and deal with one of the topics that will be in the breakouts in the afternoon. There's a lot of legal issues. Last night, President Garvey, he's a lawyer, and he went through some of the laws. One of the great organizations in the United States that you may not have heard of, but we're going to hear a little bit about it, and they've sponsored our lunch today, is the North American, get the whole title right, North American Religious Liberty Association of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and their Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Commission. And I have, as I shared last night, a little bit of story about Superbalm. You weren't there last night, but I shared about the Superbalm story. Also, 3 of my 4 kids, including Melissa, who you met last night, were born in China in the 1980s, and only 1 was born in America. And so if you can't have your kids born in China, choose an Adventist hospital. So my other was born in an Adventist hospital in California, in Glendale. So I'd like to, Orlan is over here. So Orlan Johnson is going to tell us a little bit about the work they do defending and supporting people, faith in the workplace, and as you've heard, be a Seventh-day Adventist worship on on a day of the week when many employers expect people to be at work. Orlan, thank you.
Well, thank you a lot, Brian, and I appreciate being here. First of all, happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Just got a cool note from my wife. She liked the gift, so I'm in good shape. It's interesting. I practiced law for about 25 years. I worked for the Adventist church for about 5 years, but now I've been to a session on chaplaincy, so I'm going to go home and tell my wife about the new job I want to take on. So I want to thank Karen for that powerful session we were in. But it was great to be a part of it. But I would just like to say that, when we think about, there was a time in life where we all used to think that there were two things we never talked about in polite company. We never talked about religion and we never talked about politics. That was the thing that we used to avoid. Well, now everywhere we go, all we talk about is religion and all we talk about is politics. It's amazing how the world has just transformed into this whole different operation. But the interesting thing about religion, it has become a significant workplace issue. And many of you are probably starting to see that. I mean, when you go back to the original tenets and you look at Title VII that defines religion very broadly, it talks about it from the standpoint of having the traditional religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and things of that nature. But it also has this little nuance where it talks about it also includes religious beliefs that are new, uncommon, and not part of a formal church or sect. Which means if it's going to be something you have to be responsive to if it's new, and if it's uncommon, that also means that now, in particular those who may be in the HR field, you have to spend a lot more time gathering new information all the time. So what ends up happening is that you will find out that even the accommodations that you may currently have in place may find themselves to be kind of out of market in a very quick order. And I think it's important for us to realize that we've kind of gotten to a place where we understand really sexual harassment and the responsibility that employers have, but religious accommodations is really starting to fall, for all intents and purposes, in a very similar state. And it's important that we understand that this is not just something that we ought to do because it's a good virtue, but it's something that probably businesses are going to end up doing because it's just good business. The bottom line is now starting to be impacted in a major way as it relates to those organizations that do not understand how you must go about making sure that there is no discrimination taking place from a religious standpoint in the workplace. But I think in terms of what we would look to do, and in my organization, which is a North American division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we try to focus on the aspect that religious liberty is very important, freedom is very important, but it's also important to understand that if people don't understand your religion, don't understand who you are, it's impossible for them to really connect with your doctrines. So part of what you will end up noticing is that it's important for us to be willing to gather information, to learn new things. The tagline our office tries to operate from, what we keep very simple, is we call it making friends before we need friends. Knowing who you are, understanding what I'm all about. The bottom line is most people don't join churches because of the doctrines. No one joined the Seventh-day Adventist church because they said, I didn't want to watch TV on Saturday. You joined the church basically because the people who you meet there, you connect with. There's a specific feeling that you have. So the fact is that one day you may be of one religion and tomorrow you may be of another religion, and I don't have the ability or the standing to judge you in any way. And that's why it's important that the fight that we fight in the neighborhood of religion has to be something that's non-denominational. So as a Seventh-day Adventist, I can't just go out and fight for Seventh-day Adventists. I can't just go out and fight for accommodations for the Sabbath in which we worship between Friday sundown and Saturday sundown. It's important that I fight the fight for every religion. Because I still think that the adage that's important that was brought out by Dr. Martin Luther King is injustice for one is injustice for all. And sometimes we, even whatever our religion may be, we get comfortable in looking through what I would call the windshield of our life, not worrying about what's going on. But if you look in those side mirrors, you'll find out that objects in those mirrors are a lot closer than you may think. And one of the reasons why I think this is very important is because we obviously live in a great country, but 80% of the world does not get to worship their God the way they see fit. 80%. Which means if it's happening in somebody else's backyard, it may be slowly chipping away and could one day happen in your backyard. And that's why it's so important that we sit back and take a look at what's going on, understanding the big picture. Our church was responsible a few years ago in working on a case that many of you have heard about called Abercrombie and Fitch. It was a Muslim young lady who was basically denied employment because she wore her hijab to work. And they told her that that did not fit her the company's looks policy. We were proud to be part of an amicus brief where we pulled together probably about 10 other religious groups to basically go out to the courts and say that that's wrong. That's not what you're supposed to do. And thank God the Supreme Court ended up giving us a very strong decision in her favor and basically making it clear that you cannot judge individuals and determine whether or not they should be employed or not based on clear religious principles. And this is really, really important because now businesses are really starting to feel the impact because millions of dollars now are being paid by employers who fail to understand how to go about this process in the right way. And one of the things I was looking at the EEOC website the other day, and in 2017 in the fiscal year, companies paid over $10 million in settlements to the EEOC as it relates to violation of religious accommodations and coming to settlements as a result thereof. I was kind of interested also when I was looking at some studies that were done. There was one that was done by George Cunningham that was basically coming to the point where he gathered information from 260 different organizations regarding religious policies and views. And the final analysis was when people feel like they are working in an environment where they are different and those people are not connected to other people, they're less productive. And people who feel like they're part of an organization in which they can tolerate the differences seem to be a lot more productive. So not only are we talking about fines and penalties and things that may come from being in a position where you're violating Title VII, but you actually will find out that your workplace is not as productive. Let me just tell you about a few cases and we'll close out in here in this particular session. You know, there was a senior living properties company that owned about 35 senior assisted living facilities. They ended up having to come to a settlement with the EEOC because they fired somebody who was in their dietary services who wanted to be able to take Sundays off so they could attend church. They thought it was okay to tell them no, and they ended up having to pay a fine or a penalty as a result. A North Carolina Taco Bell operator ended up paying a 6-figure settlement because they decided that somebody who was practicing the Nazarite principle and their religious belief forbade them from cutting their hair, thought it was okay to tell them if you don't cut your hair, you're getting fired, ended up having to pay a 6-figure settlement on that. Burger King franchise fired a cashier because she was of a faith that was told that you don't wear pants, that from a modesty standpoint, women should wear skirts. And as a result, they wanted her to wear pants as part of their uniform. They fired her, and what ended up happening? They ended up paying a large fine and penalty. Belk, a department store, in 2011 had an employee that would not put on a Santa hat and apron. And they were told, well, if you're not going to be part of what we do here, you're going to be fired. Well, they found out what the cost is of firing somebody who has a religious belief that doesn't fall in line with what they want to do from a policy standpoint. And one of the ones that I found really interesting, and when you talk about those uncommon and religions you may not be familiar with, Red Robin ended up having to settle for a very large six-figure settlement because they wanted an employee to cover up a wrist tattoo, which turned out to be part of his Kemetic religion, and it was an ancient Egyptian faith. And the tattoo itself actually was the scripture from his Egyptian Bible that was on his wrist. Do you see how difficult it is when you actually come out and you look at somebody and you try to determine who's religious and who's not? There was a case we looked at, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard of I think it's called the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monsters. Anybody familiar with that one? I remember when I was looking out and I saw the picture of the pirate, and he was in prison, and he was told that he couldn't wear his pirate outfit. And he came back and said, but it's part of my religion. And on one hand, when I saw it, the first thing I wanted to do was to smile, and I said, oh man. And I believe they call themselves Pastafarians. And so when I started reading that and laughing and thinking to myself, but you know, in reality, I shouldn't laugh at anybody's circumstances, because what is important to them is important to them. And we, as we move around as what I would call citizens of a greater, virtuous maybe environment, it's important for us to be able to understand that we must look at things in a way in which we're looking at an expansive view of who people are, but more importantly, from a business standpoint, we are starting to see that there's a real bottom line that's attached to it. So what we try to want to make sure that everyone focuses on, workplace accommodation is important. We like to be out on the front lines fighting for it. That's part of what we do in our office and in conjunction with other religious organizations. But it's important for you also to realize that it's something where you have a responsibility through Title VII to be the best that you can be in that environment as well. And at the end of the day, good business, good bottom line, virtuous society, living in a place where people are comfortable and enjoy their work environment, it's what it's really all about anyway. And more diversity that we can have and inclusion really generally just makes our workplace a lot better place to be. So I just wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about some of the things that we've done, give you an idea of some of the things that you should be looking for. But at the end of the day, I'd like to say that we live in a great country, but there are slowly things that are chipping away regarding individual freedoms. Don't be a part of thinking that we have nothing to worry about because we live in this great place, but to understand that it's my responsibility and your responsibility to stay studied up, to stay prayed up, to stay connected in some way so that we may be best to deal with those people that we work with in the workplace. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today.